For over 103 years, this sentence was kept out of all public editions of Helena Blavatsky's works. Some bodies walk without souls, and they don't even know it. In 1891, she delivered this manuscript sealed with black wax and 3 crossed out. Words, "vessels without light." The instruction was clear. Do not disclose while the world still believes everyone is human. The document was hidden away in a teakwood box, its lock mechanism requiring 3 different keys held by separate guardians of the Theosophical Society. Even mentioning its existence was forbidden to all but the innermost circle of initiates who had passed the 7th degree of esoteric training. But what she described in the final pages of this text changes everything, including the way you look into the eyes of those around you. The revelations contained within those yellowed pages explain phenomena that modern psychology still struggles to categorize. That inexplicable emptiness you sometimes sense when looking at certain individuals, that peculiar feeling that something fundamental is missing behind their gaze. British India, winter of 1891, Helena Blavatsky dictates her final text to a disciple as monsoon rains beat against the windows of her Adyar residence. The document was never published. Her hands, swollen with rheumatism, trembled as she insisted on pressing the seal herself, mixing the wax with a substance she called protection powder, later identified as a compound of frankincense and a rare Himalayan mineral. It was archived in Paris under a no reading for a century clause because it contained a shocking claim: there exist functional beings with human appearance who have never housed a soul. The manuscript traveled under diplomatic protection, changing hands 17 times before reaching its intended repository in the private collection of the Musée Guimet. There it remained, undisturbed through 2 world wars, revolutions, and the complete restructuring of European society. The custodians who protected it passed down their responsibility through generations, some never knowing exactly what they guarded, only that it must remain sealed. And the signs to recognize these soulless ones were only deciphered in 1994, when the envelope was accidentally violated by a restorer whose hands trembled as the yellowed pages revealed themselves in the dim light of the conservation laboratory. Later, she would describe a peculiar sensation as she handled the document, like static electricity, but colder somehow. And the smell, not of old paper, but something metallic, like ozone after lightning. By the way, which city are you watching from? I want to map how far this forgotten light can still reach. These truths resonate differently depending on where you receive them. Some locations have a higher concentration of what Blavatsky called thin spots, where the membrane between material and spiritual realities permits clearer recognition of the soulless ones. The timeline of this forbidden knowledge unfolds like a mystery spanning generations. In 1891, the manuscript was sealed with 3 indecipherable symbols, marks that looked like ancient Sanskrit but contained elements no scholar could identify. The paper itself was unusual, not the cotton rag typically used for important documents of that era, but a specialized material made from Himalayan nettle fiber, known for its exceptional durability and resistance to both moisture and fire. By 1904, it had been sent to London for occult analysis but remained sealed, passed between keepers of esoteric knowledge who feared breaking the founder's directive. William Butler Yeats, then a member of the Golden Dawn, noted in his private diary seeing Madame B's final warning during a visit to a private collection, describing it as radiating a palpable discomfort even through its sealed state. He was not permitted to handle it directly. Then, in 1994, it was rediscovered in a wooden safe behind a mirror at the Guimet Museum in Paris, where it had been hidden during the chaos of World War II. The mirror itself was significant, made of polished obsidian, a material used in scrying, and protective magic. The safe showed no external keyhole or mechanism, opening only when exposed to a specific sequence of light frequencies discovered by accident during renovation work. But the strangest thing was the dedication at the footer, "To those who walk with eyes but without reflection," a phrase that makes little sense until you understand what Blavatsky was truly describing: beings who cast no spiritual shadow, who leave no impression on the Akashic records, that record all soul activity in the universe. The manuscript itself feels different from her other works. The handwriting of her amanuensis is shaky, uncertain, as if the very act of transcribing these words caused physical discomfort. There are water spots on several pages. Tears, perhaps. From whom? The scribe or Blavatsky herself? In the margins are hastily drawn symbols, protective wards that appear in no other theosophical documents and bear striking resemblance to certain Tibetan glyphs used exclusively for protection against non-physical entities. What was she so afraid of revealing? What knowledge was so dangerous it required not just secrecy, but active protection? The answer emerges gradually through the text, building toward a revelation that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about human nature. The most extraordinary aspect is that similar observations have appeared in other texts throughout history, from ancient Vedic scriptures to obscure medieval grimoires, all hinting at the same disturbing possibility that among us walk beings who appear human in every physical aspect, but lack the essential divine spark that defines true humanity. These references were systematically removed from public versions, forming a hidden tradition of knowledge passed orally between keepers of various mystical lineages. The Vatican archives contain a 12th century manuscript with remarkably similar descriptions, though couched in religious terminology about shells that move as men. This text was sealed by papal decree and has never been fully translated or published. Only 3 people in each generation are permitted to read it, and they must take a special vow never to discuss its contents outside a consecrated space. Even more curious is the fact that Einstein himself, in private letters to physicist Wolfgang Pauli, questioned whether consciousness might be quantized rather than universal, suggesting that some human forms might lack the quantum coherence necessary for true awareness. He abandoned this line of inquiry abruptly in 1947, destroying his notes and never mentioning it in public again. But these were merely whispers, fragments, compared to Blavatsky's comprehensive description of the soulless ones who walk among us, unaware even of their own fundamental emptiness. And now, for the first time, we can explore what she actually wrote. The term vessels without light appears 5 times in distinct passages throughout the manuscript. Blavatsky describes them as mental cocoons that have lost the thread of the divine spark. These are not people possessed by evil or darkness. That would be too simple, too comforting. No, according to Blavatsky's forbidden text, they are absences. People who merely react but do not truly feel. They move through life as automata, she writes, following patterns learned through observation of those with souls. They mimic. They echo. But there is no internal light guiding them. Their eyes reflect but do not emit. The writing becomes increasingly precise here, with detailed observations about physical mannerisms, how these beings tend to blink at regular intervals, regardless of environmental stimuli, how their pupils dilate mechanically rather than in response to emotional states, how even their body temperature runs slightly cooler than the norm. The writing is methodical, detached, as if Blavatsky were documenting a new species rather than making a spiritual claim. She lists observable traits, a certain flatness to emotional responses, an inability to appreciate beauty without reference to social convention, a peculiar emptiness when speaking of childhood memories. Ask them of their earliest recollection, she advises, and note how they construct rather than recall. They will pause, calculate what should be remembered from that age, and fabricate accordingly. Most disturbing is her claim that these beings constitute between 17 and 23% of the population, a range she calculated based on observations across 5 continents and consultations with fellow sensitives who could detect this absence. They are more common in urban centers, she notes, where the noise and pace of mechanical life mask their fundamental difference. If this is real, there are people near you who will never feel true compassion, because they simply cannot. They may learn behaviors that approximate empathy. They may even excel at performing the social rituals of concern, but the inner resonance, that profound recognition of another's pain as somehow connected to one's own existence, remains forever beyond their capacity. When I first read these passages, I felt a chill of recognition. Haven't we all at some point sensed an inexplicable emptiness in certain individuals? That odd feeling when someone's words and actions don't quite align with the emotion they should convey? The uncanny valley of human interaction where something feels fundamentally missing. Modern psychology might label this as psychopathy or sociopathy, but Blavatsky was describing something more fundamental. Not a disorder of an existing soul, but the absence of one altogether. The second clue lies in dreams, or in their absence. Blavatsky claims that the soulless do not dream, or have dreams without light, without faces, without voices. An entire section of the manuscript details sleep patterns with blank records, no symbols, no memory, no subconscious processing. The pages contain detailed illustrations of brainwave patterns, observed through primitive electrodes of her own design. Copper and zinc plates attached to the sleeping subject's temples, connected to a sensitive galvanometer that recorded subtle electrical variations during sleep. In true sleep, she writes, the soul journeys, connects, remembers its nature beyond the flesh. But those without the divine spark lie in darkness. They rest, but do not travel. They close their eyes, but see nothing. Ask them of their dreams, and they will invent tales based on what they believe they should have experienced. She describes their morning routine as particularly revealing, lacking the momentary disorientation that occurs as a returning soul fully reintegrates with its physical vessel. She describes specific experiments conducted in India with several subjects. Those suspected of lacking souls were observed during sleep. Their breathing patterns remained regular, showing none of the rapid eye movement or subtle facial expressions that indicate dreaming. More disturbing still, when awakened during deep sleep phases, they reported nothing, not even the common experience of being awakened from dreamless sleep. It is as if they simply switch off and on again, with no transitional state between consciousness and unconsciousness. One of the most fascinating aspects of the manuscript is a detailed account of an experiment conducted in 1890, where Blavatsky and her assistants monitored 5 subjects throughout an entire night. 3 displayed normal sleep patterns, but 2 exhibited what she called mechanical rest. Their bodies recuperated, but no evidence of dream state or spiritual activity was detected. Upon waking, these 2 subjects consistently described artificial dreams clearly borrowed from literature or conversations they had overheard. If our dreams are portals of the soul, then what remains when there is only silence? This question takes on profound significance when we consider modern neuroscience's still incomplete understanding of why we dream at all. The evolutionary purpose of this seemingly wasteful cognitive activity remains debated. But what if Blavatsky was right? What if dreams are not a neurological byproduct, but evidence of the soul's continued existence beyond physical constraints? This observation connects eerily with modern sleep research. In 2018, neurologists at the University of Wisconsin documented rare cases of individuals who show no evidence of REM sleep, the phase associated with dreaming. These subjects reported normal cognitive function, but described their sleep as darkness, without content. The researchers attributed this to a neurological anomaly, but what if they were observing exactly what Blavatsky described over a century earlier? But it's in the third layer of the text that the most disturbing revelation emerges: how they drain the energy of those who still have souls. Blavatsky encoded a ritual to keep the soul illuminated, even when surrounded by essenceless beings. The manuscript describes it as soul fortification, a daily practice combining a specific breathing pattern, amber visualization, and a word never revealed in her public books. The pages containing this ritual show signs of being read more frequently than the rest of the document: fingerprints visible at the edges, slight wear to the corners, as if this section was referenced repeatedly by those few granted access. The ritual requires 12 minutes at dawn facing east. The breath moves in a 4-4-8 pattern. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 8. While breathing, one must visualize amber light collecting at the center of the chest, expanding with each breath until it forms a protective sphere around the entire body. This sphere must be mentally maintained throughout the day. refreshed, whenever one encounters a suspected vessel without light. The most critical element is a mantra, written in the text using a substitution cipher that took cryptographers 3 months to decode. The word itself translates roughly to "I remain," though the original Sanskrit carries deeper connotations of conscious persistence against dissolution. Blavatsky claims this sound vibration strengthens the electromagnetic field that anchors the soul to the physical body, a concept remarkably similar to theories later developed in quantum biology. Without this daily exercise, Blavatsky warns, even an initiate can slowly extinguish. For the soulless are not malevolent by design. They are empty vessels seeking to fill themselves. And what they lack, they unconsciously draw from those around them. She describes the sensation of energy depletion as initially subtle, a slight cooling of extremities, a momentary disorientation, a feeling of having forgotten something important. But with prolonged exposure, the effects become more severe. Chronic fatigue, emotional numbness, and eventually a state she calls soul sleepiness, where one's connection to higher consciousness begins to attenuate. She claimed that certain professions and environments particularly exposed individuals to this draining effect, specifically mentioning hospitals, government offices, and educational institutions where emotional fatigue is often attributed to work stress rather than energy depletion. Places where souls are processed as units rather than recognized as sacred flames, she writes, become breeding grounds for the soulless and dangerous territories for the ensouled. This warning feels strangely relevant in our modern context of emotional vampires and energy thieves, terms that entered popular psychology only in recent decades. What if these concepts aren't merely metaphors, but untrained observations of exactly what Blavatsky was describing scientifically? The rising rates of burnout, compassion fatigue, and inexplicable exhaustion might not simply be products of our frenetic lifestyles, but symptoms of an energetic reality Blavatsky identified over a century ago. But a detail hidden on the edge of the manuscript may point to another illustrious name involved in all this. In the final section of the forbidden text, a revelation emerges that transforms our understanding of human nature itself. Blavatsky writes with uncharacteristic directness, "The absence of soul is not a punishment, it is a condition, but proximity to them can extinguish even your light." There's a profound pause in the text here, a large space on the page as if she needed time to consider the implications of what followed. The handwriting changes slightly, becoming more deliberate, more careful, as though each word were being chosen with exceptional caution. She believed that the 21st century would see an increase in these beings, and that only those who strengthened their souls would energetically survive. This wasn't presented as doom or judgment, but as evolutionary pressure, a challenge to humanity's spiritual development. As material values ascend and spiritual awareness recedes, she predicts, the conditions for soul embodiment become less favorable. More vessels will come into existence without the divine spark. This is neither good nor evil. It is simply the cycle of Kali Yuga manifesting as it must. What makes this particularly striking is how it connects to current social conditions. Blavatsky predicted that materialist civilization would create disconnected masses, functional but hollow. She specifically mentioned mechanical thinking becoming dominant, creating environments where soul development would be actively discouraged. The manuscript contains a detailed timeline predicting the rise of technologies that would accelerate this process, remarkably accurate descriptions of mass media, computational systems, and even what appears to be a primitive concept of the internet, all serving to externalize consciousness and attenuate individual soul connection. In the coming age, she writes, society itself will be structured to reward those without inner light. Their inability to feel deep compassion, to experience existential questioning, to connect beyond utility, these will become advantages in systems designed for consumption rather than consciousness. She describes how traditional soul-nurturing practices would be systematically devalued, replaced by simulations of spiritual experience that provide temporary emotional relief without actual soul development. This passage reads like an eerie premonition of modern burnout, emotional detachment, and social media personas. phenomena that wouldn't exist for another century after her writing. Her description of people increasingly constructing artificial identities based on external validation rather than internal authenticity feels disturbingly relevant to our current cultural moment. And if part of your exhaustion isn't yours, what if you're being drained by someone who never had a soul to exchange? Consider how often you felt inexplicably depleted after interactions with certain people. Not because of conflict or activity, but something more subtle, as if some essential vitality had been siphoned away. Modern psychology might call this an interaction with a high-conflict personality or someone with attachment issues. But Blavatsky's framework suggests something more fundamental, an encounter with someone incapable of generating their own spiritual energy. The pages detailing how to recognize these energy depletions show signs of particular wear. Corners turned, edges softened, as if this section was referenced frequently by the few permitted to access the document. Blavatsky lists specific physical symptoms: a coolness in the center of the chest, a slight pressure behind the eyes, a momentary difficulty remembering simple words. These sensations, she writes, are your soul's warning system alerting you to energetic depletion. Heed them immediately by removing yourself from the interaction and performing at minimum the 3 sacred breaths. The symbol engraved on the back cover coincides with another manuscript by Rudolf Steiner. This unexpected connection emerged only when researchers compared the Blavatsky document with Steiner's private papers from 1913, where he references HPB's warning about the hollow ones and uses an identical sigil as a protective mark. The symbol itself resembles a complex geometric pattern, part mandala, part mathematical equation, that Steiner incorporated into the architecture of the first Goetheanum, particularly in windows designed to filter light in specific patterns. Steiner, who founded anthroposophy after breaking from theosophy, rarely mentioned Blavatsky in his later works. Yet this symbol suggests a direct transmission of knowledge, that he not only knew about this teaching, but considered it important enough to incorporate into his own esoteric system. His lectures on elemental beings and the threshold of the spiritual world contain veiled references to concepts strikingly similar to Blavatsky's vessels without light, though he approached the subject from a different philosophical framework. What does this mean for us? In one scenario, conscious people learn to preserve their essence. They practice daily energy maintenance, become selective about their deep connections, and develop an intuitive recognition of those who drain rather than exchange. This isn't about judgment or superiority, but about spiritual self-preservation in an increasingly depleting world. Blavatsky suggests specific practices beyond the protective ritual: regular exposure to natural elements, particularly flowing water and direct sunlight, cultivation of creative expression that requires no audience, and regular periods of complete solitude to allow the soul to remember itself without distraction. In a darker scenario, occult circles begin using this knowledge as a form of exclusion and judgment. The concept of soulless beings becomes weaponized, used to dehumanize others rather than understand a spiritual condition. This potential for misuse might explain why the manuscript remained sealed for so long. In the final pages, Blavatsky herself expresses this concern. This knowledge must be protected not only from the profane, but also from those who would use it to divide rather than discern. The recognition of vessels without light should inspire compassion, not fear, for they are not enemies but expressions of cosmic necessity. Imagine rediscovering your own soul amid the crowd, knowing how to protect it from those who only know how to draw from others without reciprocating. In a world of increasing disconnection, this knowledge becomes not just esoteric curiosity, but practical survival wisdom. The manuscript concludes with a meditation for strengthening the connection between physical and spiritual awareness, a practice Blavatsky claimed would not only protect against energy depletion, but gradually awaken dormant soul potentials. Would you share this with someone close to you, or keep it secret to avoid panic? This isn't a rhetorical question. The responsibility of such knowledge weighs heavily. To recognize the soulless is to see the world differently, to understand that some emptiness cannot be filled, some connections cannot be formed, no matter how much love or attention is given. Blavatsky suggests that this recognition fundamentally changes how one navigates relationships, careers, even geographic locations. For some environments naturally support soul vitality, while others actively deplete it. The broken seal on the envelope held a number, and it appears in another forbidden file, connected to Carl Jung's Red Book, where he describes entities he called empty people during his own psychological breakdown. The connection suggests a lineage of observation spanning multiple spiritual traditions and psychological frameworks. Jung never publicly acknowledged reading Blavatsky's secret manuscript, but his private correspondence contains a letter to physicist Wolfgang Pauli mentioning HPB's final warning and noting that it aligned with his observations of certain patients who displayed perfect persona function without individual essence. And if the empty vessels are just the first layer, what if there's a second type, capable of perfectly mimicking feelings? This possibility, briefly mentioned in Blavatsky's final paragraph, opens an even more disturbing dimension. What if some soulless beings have evolved to simulate emotional connection so convincingly that even trained observers cannot distinguish them from the truly ensouled? She hints at a future where the hollow ones will learn to project the appearance of depth as a desert mirage simulates water. This adaptive capacity would make identification nearly impossible without specific esoteric training. This brings us to the edge of what we can know, to the limits of spiritual discernment itself. Perhaps this is why the manuscript concludes with a prayer rather than a technique, an acknowledgement that ultimate understanding lies beyond intellectual grasp. The final paragraph, written in Blavatsky's own hand rather than dictated, reads, "May those with the divine spark recognize each other in the growing darkness. May they preserve the sacred flame not through separation, but through conscious communion. For the age comes when light itself must learn new ways of shining." If this video resonates with something you've sensed but couldn't articulate, you're not alone. Like, subscribe, and activate notifications. Share with those who still feel, before the world becomes inwardly mute. Your recognition of this truth isn't coincidental. It suggests your own soul is vibrant enough to perceive the distinction Blavatsky described. This awareness itself forms a protection, a first step toward conscious energy management in an increasingly depleting world. In our next episode, Einstein and the secret calculation of the minimum frequency to keep the soul active, his hidden equations that measured consciousness itself, and why he destroyed most of his notes after reaching a conclusion too dangerous to share with the world of 1954. The connection between quantum field theory and what mystical traditions call the subtle body, a scientific framework for understanding exactly how soulless beings drain energy from the unsouled. Remember, the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it merely whispers to those ready to hear it. And in a world increasingly filled with noise, the ability to hear that whisper may be the most valuable skill you can develop.